Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, and that's the day that I invite you to help support the mission of the Master's Ministry, which is my way of describing the life I have been living and am continuing to live for Master. I've reached the point where the work I'm doing is more than the community I'm living in can support. Too many priorities. So I've asked those of you who benefit from this ministry and would like to see others to benefit to help support it. The primary support mechanism is through Patreon, which is a wonderful platform for allowing creative people to find those people who would like to become their patrons, modern day patrons. And also you can go directly to my website, Asha Joy, and there's a very simple way to donate that way. And an effortless way to help support is to become a subscriber to the YouTube channel, which is where most of you are probably watching this. So if you subscribe, it helps us with our status on YouTube, and that brings certain benefits. And it's impossible for me to express to you what a profound experience it's been for me to receive such generous and wholehearted support from so many people. It's been a very deep confirmation of the rightness of the life choices I've made and the ongoing gifts that come when we follow through on the ideals that inspire our hearts. So I encourage you to do it just for that reason, just for the satisfaction of putting energy behind what is most deeply important to us. That's what makes life worthwhile. I speak from deep experience on that. So let's have a prayer now, and we'll go on with our program. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, we ask your help in living our lives in conformance with the aspiration of our hearts. Many, many people seek to live by high ideals, but we need your help to fulfill that dream. This world is filled with so many conflicting energies that pull us in so many directions and try to persuade us that the fulfillment and the security we seek lies in the changing world around us. But deep within we know that our only fulfillment is in attunement with Thee. Guide us and bless us, that we may live by this highest of all possible ideals. Om. Peace. Amen. we've been working with this book, Paramhansa Yogananda, a biography by Swami Kriyananda, a biography with personal reflections and reminiscences. It's a really unusual and lovely book. We've been working with chapter 17, which is called The Salient Qualities of the Master. And there's 32 of them. In 4 days, we got to the fourth one, but now we're slowing down because the first outstanding trait I observed was Master's complete absence of ego. And 4 days ago, I spoke about that quality at length, but I received a question, and also I encourage you whenever you feel to send me questions, not only that relate to what I've just said, which I can answer in this context, but also once a month, as part of the Patreon subscription actually, I do a question and answer session, and I collect what are usually very good questions for an interesting hour discussion. So I received a question I just watched. It says, The Absence of Ego, the first part of this series. In light of Swamiji's statement about Master never being affected by what anyone said about him, What are your thoughts about the purpose of his escape to Mexico for 3 to 4 months? That's Master's escape to Mexico, not Swami's. And Master's comments about yellow journalism. I don't know if yellow journalism is still a phrase people know, but so both of those questions are inherently worth answering, but they also raised to me just an overall question about what absence of ego really is that seemed worth considering. One question usually tells me that more than one person may have had the same inclination, just didn't put it to writing. So first, just let me be specific so you'll know what I'm talking about. There was a time in Master's life, I think it was after 1925, after he got Mount Washington. I'm not sure exactly when it was. Maybe it was at the end of the 20s, the early 30s. Master was working extremely hard to establish his work in America. In India, Master said, the Guru sits and everybody takes care of everything. They shower money upon him, they give him buildings, they just take care of things. He said in America, the Guru not only has to support himself, he has to support all his disciples, plus all the real estate. It's just, there has been, especially at that point when he was so unknown, there's no tradition like there is in India. In India, there's this tremendous understanding that those who have resources, that the greatest blessing for themselves and their family is to support a spiritual person or a spiritual work. Swami Master talked about when he went to India in 1935, he was just meditating under a tree and somebody came and just filled his lap with rupees. And then the people of that area just tried to persuade him just to stay there because they knew it was such a blessing for their whole community if he would live with them, and they promised to support him in every way. And Master had to come back to America where paying the mortgage was his responsibility. Also, and I believe this was at the same time, but I'm not certain of the exact timing, Master brought a lifelong friend, a childhood friend from India to help him with the work here. And that man not only gave up his sannyas vow to marry, but he also turned against Master and sued him in court for compensation for back wages because he had worked as a sannyasi and he took Master to court and he actually won a substantial amount of money from Master, so that all the work that Master had done traveling around the country, sending the money back to Mount Washington to pay for the buildings and for the work there, it was all wiped out by the litigation because he received a huge award because he'd never been paid wages. After that, Master reorganized legally. And so later, when a different man that Master brought over from India tried to do the same thing, he never got, he was able to, of course, marry and leave the work. That was his freedom to do it at any time he wanted to. But his effort to obtain back wages failed because Master had reorganized at that point. So Master was worldly wise as well as being spiritual. But it was somehow during that period, I believe, or some equally discouraging time, Master left. He went on a vacation to Mexico. That's how it's put now. And but he stayed away for quite some time, and he wasn't certain. Here it says 3 to 4 months. I don't really remember. And he wasn't sure he was going to return. He just said to Divine Mother, I didn't come to this world to build an organization. I came to love you. And I'm not going to do this anymore. However, Divine Mother drew him back. Now that's how that story is told. I know Swami left when we were in the middle of litigation and the community was arguing with itself, and Swami just went to Hawaii on an open-ended ticket. He came back after several weeks because he again felt Divine Mother sent him back, but he just thought, why would I do this? It's just, I don't need to do this. The yellow journalism that she refers to, yellow journalism, it's a quaint phrase from the 30s probably. Yellow journalism meant ugly journalism, where you try to destroy people, where you criticize people, where you try to tear things down, where you create a fight, where you hurt people's reputation. It used to be considered dishonorable, now it's just considered normal. So, but Master wrote a very fierce article about it, speaking out against it, about the horrible tendency to try to destroy rather than to build up. And just what a terrible thing it was for society, and what a terrible thing it was for the individuals who do it, whose life work is to find a flaw. It's what a mindset, what a consciousness to come through you. It's a very good article. I'm not quite sure. Probably these days, if you Google anything, you'll find it. So specifically, Swami had said about Master that Swami said, I never saw that he was in any way affected by anything that people said about him. So I think the reference to yellow journalism is, then why would it matter if people wrote awful things about others? Well, for one, it's very bad for the people who are doing it to have such a dark, uncompassionate consciousness. And so Master was there to help people, and he wanted to help people understand that this consciousness is not useful. Master was also here to uplift society, and he was pointing out that these directions for society as a whole have very, very deleterious consequences, which they do. That's where we are now. Now it's a national sport to denigrate any possible idealism or heroism. We just do our best to make sure that no heroic action remains admirable. It's an awful thing, but I'm not going to go there. That's less the point. The point is, what does it mean to overcome ego? I tried to explain it before, but I think I need to say it more clearly. You are still an individual, and you still have an individual event. And there has to be enough ego identification to be able to carry on the mission. You have to know which body you're supposed to keep going. You have to know which work you're supposed to be supporting. So there's enough awareness of that individuality. Now, I'm simply not qualified to speak more about this, but I will give you a few images, both from, and I always have to talk about my experience with Swami, because that's where I saw it firsthand. I made a grave mistake with Swamiji for a number of years. It took me longer than I wished it had for me to finally understand this, that he was really experiencing human life. He wasn't like not experiencing it. We think to overcome the ego means that you're not human anymore, that you don't have feelings, that your feelings aren't hurt, or that your sense of injustice doesn't exist, or your necessity to rise to the occasion to give compassionate love when love is the last thing that's being directed at you. The way Master put it, and he was talking about Jesus when he talked about this, he said, if Jesus just came into the world and was never touched by anything that happened, what kind of an example would that be? How could we learn from that? The whole point of an avatar is to be the perfect example of how God wants us to live in this world. But if Jesus came in and nothing ever touched him, and he laughed at pain, he laughed at other people's sufferings, if not outwardly, at least inwardly, that he never really felt compassion for anyone, that when people starved, it didn't bother him, when people were cruel to him, that he was just indifferent to it. Master used the phrase, what example would that be? When I watched Swamiji for so many years, and especially when I wrote the book Light Bearer, it wasn't that he never grappled with the realities of the human condition. It's that his response to those realities was always exemplary. Now, exemplary includes, I don't really want to deal with this anymore. You know, I've put all my years of effort into trying to help people, and if this is my return, I need to step back and ask the question, is this what Divine Mother really wants of me? Even the necessity to withdraw and ask Divine Mother, is this really what you want of me, is an exemplary response to human experience. if we just go through it as an automaton and see the reason that the masters, and this is really just my speculation. Of course, I've heard some of this from Swami, I've heard some of this from Master, but it's an issue that I myself have grappled to try to understand, because there I was with Swami. And I was trying to learn from him what it was to live. And I came into that situation with some profound misunderstandings, which my honest observation of Swami and listening to him talk about Master helped me to understand. Because I thought to overcome the ego was to suppress everything that was other than, oh yes, whatever happens is just perfect. And it was just something I made up, but I felt I always had to look perfect. And since I wasn't, the only way that I could look perfect was to suppress any wave of imperfection. You know, I can't become angry, I can't become sad, I can't become discouraged. Fortunately, it didn't work, you know, and all of those truths just kept disrupting, you know, the sort of smooth picture I was trying to put forward. But then I noticed that Swami expressed frustration. Swamiji expressed disappointment. Swami didn't express anger, but Swami expressed disappointment. Swami wept with compassion. Swami talked about how Master wept with compassion and was, you know, was disheartened when ignorance persisted. He was disheartened when people turned away the gifts that he had offered them. Jesus, there's a little temple and on the hillside overlooking Jerusalem, because that is the spot, it is said, where Jesus wept for Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I would gather your, you know, I would gather you like under my wings like a mother hen gathers her chicks. I would protect you. He was speaking to the people of Jerusalem, not to the city. I would protect you. I brought you so much, but you don't want it. And he wept. He wasn't like just, oh yeah, this is just the way God wants it. What difference does it make? It broke his heart that that's what was happening. When he was on the cross, Jesus is on the cross. He sees the people who've crucified him, and his heart breaks for them. Father, forgive them, he said. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the karma they're getting for crucifying your messenger. And his heart broke for them, and he interceded. He took some of their karma as if he wasn't taking enough already. But he struggled when he's carrying the cross, when he's beaten. Yes, on one level, the Master could transcend it, but he chooses not to. I have two pictures of what an avatar is. And the reason this is important is because otherwise we don't know how to behave. And when over time, an avatar's life is gradually whitewashed, and instead of going to Mexico in absolute, just wiping the dust of America off his feet and just getting away from the whole thing, Master goes on a vacation to Mexico. Then we don't understand that to be at the end of your rope, to be absolutely discouraged, to have a crisis of faith, and to need to go off and ask Divine Mother, what are you trying to do to me, is a perfectly reasonable response, and is even the response of the Masters. And that's why I realized when I didn't understand how tender-hearted Swami was. And the way he put it was like this when I finally discussed this issue with him. He said, just because I'm impersonal about the hurts I receive, it doesn't mean that I don't receive them as hurts. I mean, and that's a very subtle thing that I've had to meditate on for a long time. It's like there's a part of you that still knows that this is not my whole reality, but this is a part of my reality. You know that people I've trusted have turned on me. And that despite my most giving and most, expressive efforts, my love is not being received, it's being misunderstood. Despite years and years of effort there's years and years of effort still in front of me. And we either, worst of all, suppress anything that doesn't match what we think we're supposed to be, and then our bodies get tighter and tighter, our voices get thinner and thinner, and eventually often a physical illness manifests because we think that's how we're supposed to behave. So when you see the masters actually living life as we're living it, but living it correctly, which is always facing toward the divine and trying to resolve every issue by deeper attunement, that's the perfection, you see. The perfection is not that there's no effort required to do that. The perfection is that's how the effort is directed. And if it's necessary to withdraw and regroup from time to time, that's also part of it. That's also part of it. And so these are two images that I've thought of that work. There's a friend, many of you know of him, Jai Ram, and for karmic reasons that are impossible to understand, he spent all of his adult life in prison for a serious crime of which that he's not guilty of. And that's just a fact. And I've known him now for 30-some years, and I've visited him in several of the major maximum security prison that he was in. Folsom, which is a famous place and impressive. And when you go all the way into a maximum security prison, you're not in an ordinary circumstance. And you've been through all these different layers of I can't get out of here very easily. So it's a vivid image to me, a maximum security prison. But once you're in there, because there's so many safeguards, you know, the prisoners are just people like us. And, you know, life seems like that. Of course, there's armed guards around the edges. So I've often thought that this, you know, incarnating in this world is like entering a maximum security prison, which is, once you finally get into the heart of it, you're just living your life, but you can't leave it. And there's different rules that are set up inside that place, which I know from my friend, and then there would be always the point where he would go back on the other side of a wall that I never crossed. And I knew that there were a lot of rules inside there that bound him, absolutely, like this. Didn't matter if they were reasonable, didn't matter if they were fair, they had him like this. Now, as it happens, my friend is innocent, but he's still bound by all those rules. Not everybody in there is innocent, even though everyone may say they are. So I feel like when an avatar incarnates in this world, he willingly enters a maximum security prison. And he's innocent. He doesn't have to be there. He didn't have to come in and live in that maximum security prison. But once he's in there, all the same rules apply. And he's bound by every, you know, the bad food, the bullying of the guards, the cramped living conditions, the tensions, the fights, the prejudices, everything that go on. And he has to constantly, if the avatar's in there, he has to constantly negotiate and respond to all these conditions. And a piece of him knows, always knows, that this is not normal. This is not real life. Real life, in a master's case, is perfect spiritual freedom. But as long as he's living inside that, all those same rules apply. And he has to, and he's working through a physical body, he has to work within the limitations of a physical body. As Master said again, speaking of Jesus, if Jesus just came in and didn't obey any of the normal human rules, again, what example would that be? But if he was bound by the same rules, and yet every time turned toward the light, no matter how challenging. When they came to arrest Jesus, when the armed cohort came to arrest him, Jesus knew where this was leading. They were looking for him, and Jesus stepped forward toward the armed guards and said, "Who are you seeking?" And they say that the force of Jesus' stepping forward, and he didn't touch them, knocked the guards to the ground. Now, what would be the natural thing to do? Oh, the guards are coming. I'm going to hide in the corner of the cave. I'm going to run away. You distract them and I'll, get on my donkey and go galloping away to the Sea of Galilee. But instead, he stepped forward and said, who are you seeking? I am the one you are seeking. Don't arrest any of these. I am the one you are seeking. And then Peter pulled a sword to fight. And Jesus said, put your sword away. Who lives by the sword dies by the sword. This is my Father's will. So in every circumstance, when he was confronted with human realities, he turned toward the light. But that didn't mean he didn't feel it. Just because he was impersonal and cooperating with God's will didn't mean that his heart wasn't broken. And he wasn't afraid for himself, but he was heartsick at Jerusalem. Jerusalem, I would gather your, like a chick gathers, like a mother hen gathers her chicks, and you would have none of it. Instead, you're going to crucify me. Heartbreaking, how could it not be? But, and this is the perfect prayer, thy will, not mine, be done. So the other way of thinking about it is, and you can see how, let's go to our maximum security prison and think about this for a minute, because I lived this with Swami. No matter how tough it was, even when he would become discouraged, even on occasion when Swami would become discouraged, he was a guest in my house once, and I went upstairs. I thought, I didn't know where he was, but I didn't know that he was in his room, because when I walked into his room, it was completely dark, and Swami was sitting cross-legged on the bed. He wasn't meditating. He had his arms folded, as he sometimes did, and he was just staring into the dark. Oh my goodness, sir. This was in the middle of the litigation when he was being just excoriated by his own gurubhais. And he was just sitting there staring into the dark. And he said, I believe this was the time. He said something like, why would Babaji be doing this to me? Why would Babaji allow such undharmic people to have power over me? And then he said, perhaps I've deeply displeased him. And it was a natural question to ask. And it was after that, and now I may have some of my sequences wrong, but this was all of a flow of energy. It was either after or near that time that Swami went away to Hawaii. And he went away to Hawaii to find out if Babaji was deeply displeased with him. And therefore Swamiji had to change what he was doing. Now that would be a very natural human response, wouldn't it? And it would be, given these circumstances, that question has to be asked and answered. And if the masters don't exemplify for us that perfectly natural response, and even that appropriate response, how would we ever know? And if that thought would arise in us, we would just suppress it. We would be embarrassed to admit it. And we think we're doing the devotees a great service by whitewashing and glorifying and mythologizing our spiritual heroes, but we're actually doing ourselves a terrible disservice, because we won't see the footprints in the sand and we'll think that we're lost when we're actually going exactly where we should be going. Now, when Swami asked Master about being William the Conqueror, and who was at war, I mean, he was out there killing people with his own sword, and he was urging his disciples and his soldiers to do the same thing. He spoke about Norman Paulson, who was a very big man, my giant, Master called him, and said, when I was William, you were my giant then too, and you fought hard for me. Fought hard in war means kills people. So Swami said to Master, how can you be an avatar and live a life like that? And Master answered, inwardly you are always free. That's how he put it. That's a phrase to meditate on, because outwardly he was at war. He was at war when he was Fernando III. He was at war for 26 years, his entire monarchy. He was at war. And inwardly he was always free. But it doesn't look like, lo, my children, God bless you. It looked like, you know, a wild war cry and a galloping forward on his horse with his sword in his hand, or whatever it was, his lance, whatever they were using in that particular time. So one more image that I've also found helpful besides the maximum security is, and I think of it like this. Here's a big brick wall. It's a thick, big stone wall. On this side is the freedom of the spirit in the astral world and beyond, and on this side is the material plane. And I, and everyone I know, is karmically compelled to incarnate. And so some force just tosses us over the wall like this. You know, we're just happy in the astral world, and then whoom, we get flung over the wall, and we bounce, and we're here in the material plane. You know, we're born. Master says the baby starts crying because here it is on the material plane again, like this. And as soon as we are here, we open our eyes and we start reaching, A newborn baby will reach up for its parent's hand. I watched a baby who was a little girl, 2 minutes old. Her father was leaning over, she reaches up his hand. You know, she has this tiny little hand. He was a big man. Great big thumb, she grabs it like that, grabbed his whole heart at that point and just held it in her hand, and still does, like this. But I also thought, my God, she's 2 minutes old and she's reaching. You know, she's reaching out toward this world. And that's what we do. We get thrown over. We basically don't notice the brick wall, or if we do, we turn our backs to it. And we see all the shiny stuff over here. We start heading toward all the shiny stuff, and we spend an incarnation grabbing shiny stuff. The saint, or the avatar more, he gets thrown over like this, and he knows what he needs to do is burrow back through the stone wall. So he immediately, and you hear this about Master, Master says he lay in his crib in many languages, the devotional chants and prayers of many languages whirled in his mind, and he just talks about being in the crib like this. Swami says, for many years, from as long as he could remember, when he would close his eyes to sleep, a great light would appear before his closed eyes, and it would expand and expand until he merged into it. And that's how he went to sleep. He thought everyone went to sleep that way. And he talks about that super conscious experience, which he turned away from for various reasons. I've already overrun my time, so I'm not going to go into that in detail. But he said after he took Kriya and went into super consciousness through Kriya, as he put it, it was the exact experience of his childhood. And he even said it was the same moment, which is just another amazing. It was the same moment because there's no time in super consciousness. In other words, they get thrown over the wall. The Master turns back toward the wall and begins to chisel his way through it. So he's living on the, over here, but he is not confused about the direction of freedom. So to not be confused about what I'm supposed to do here and how I'm supposed to do it doesn't mean that one has become identified with this limitation, but still one has to chisel one's way back through the wall. Greater can no love be than this, from a life of infinite joy and freedom in God, willingly to embrace limitation, pain, and death for the salvation of mankind. They embrace it, they take it, but inwardly you are always free. That's as clear as I can make it, and I hope it helps. God bless you.